Are you a farmer or butcher ready to master direct-to-consumer marketing and meat success? Then you're in the right place. I'm Jared Hawken, the founder of ChopLocal. Each episode of this podcast features interviews with farmers and butchers who have built successful direct-to-consumer meat businesses, and they're going to share their secrets for success with you. From actionable tips to inspiring stories, this podcast has ingredients you will need to succeed in the meat business. After the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and follow us on social. And check out the rest of our educational resources at ChopLocalUniversity.com. Now, let's turn it over to my business partner, Katie, to get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Meat Success Podcast. I'm Katie Olthoff, the co-founder of ChopLocal and ChopLocal University, and I'm really excited for today's episode. It's another behind the scenes of ChopLocal episode because I am joined here with our latest new employee, Sierra Walter. Hi, Sierra.
Hi, Katie.
Thanks for getting on here with me. I want to start out just by having you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about your agriculture background.
Sure. Well, like you said, my name is Sierra Walter, and I'm originally from Western Oklahoma, and I grew up on a small cow-calf operation. And growing up, one of my main passions was I was very much into horses. That was like my main thing growing up. I loved doing it. I rode horses, showed horses, and so that was one of my main passions. And I didn't really show livestock, but one of my main involvement in the cattle industry was my family had a beef business growing up. So my dad, he works at a company called Cattle Facts, and he really specialized his career in the feedlot segment of the cattle industry. And so around the time I was in middle school, he had this idea to start a beef business by partnering with some of our family friends that actually have their own feedlot. And so that was a huge part of my perspective growing up, was that segment of the industry. I remember lots of Saturdays growing up, getting up early, going to the feedlot, packing up a cooler and going to the farmer's market. And that was such a cool experience because I not only got to see like all of the work that went into raising cattle, but also like going to the farmers markets and talking to consumers, because as a middle schooler, I didn't really know what questions consumers had and, what they wanted to know about where their meat comes from and, the different types of production practices that people want, whether that's grain-fed or grass-finished. And I remember when I was an FFA, I wrote a whole speech about grass-finished versus grain-finished beef because I talked to consumers about that all the time at the farmer's market. So that was a big part of my upbringing and my main involvement in the livestock and cattle industry outside of horses. So that's a little bit about what kind of like made me excited and drawn to ChopLocal, because I feel like I relate to the vendors a lot because I know a lot of the struggles that come with running a meat business. And from my experience and skill set in marketing communications, it's just a lot of fun to pair that with meat businesses and help vendors have success.
Yeah, this sounds so much like when we were doing your job interview, and I hate to make you do that, but for those of you listening that don't know, ChopLocal received our second USDA grant last fall. And so we were able to hire a marketing specialist for our team. And we had a ton of applicants, which were fantastic. Honestly, the first time that I went through applications to try to choose who to interview, there were probably 3 times more people that I wanted to interview than we actually was feasible to do. But Sierra's application stood out partly because she had that experience with her family at the farmer's market, and we thought that was a really great tie-in to ChopLocal. So I don't remember if you mentioned this already, but Western Oklahoma is where you grew up. So then you went on to Oklahoma State. Am I remembering everything correctly?
Yeah, in 2019, I went to Oklahoma State University pursuing a degree in agricultural communications. Another thing that really interested me growing up was I love to write and I love storytelling. And so I kind of went into ag communications thinking that I was going to pursue a more journalistic career. And then when I got into it, I learned that, there's so much more to communications than just writing. There's social media, there's photography, there's graphic design. And I've kind of, like through college, I learned to love all of those different disciplines of marketing and communication. And I think what really led me to social media specifically was through my internships. I think whenever I hit college, social media had been around for a while, but I think brands were really starting to realize that like their social media needed to be a huge priority. It wasn't just something like to hand off to an intern. And so I was seeing so many jobs of like social media specialist. And so that's what I really focused on in my internships.
So another thing that we've talked about with social media is like our generational differences a little bit, because I will just say I am in my early 40s and you are in your early 20s, early to mid maybe. And so when I was in college, Facebook was just coming online. I was one of the first college users. When it opened up to our college, to Iowa State at the time, I was able to get a Facebook account. It was limited to just that. And then obviously since that time, there have been more platforms that have come and gone, and Instagram has become so big. And then just the last few years, TikTok has become so big. But do you remember a time without social media?
Not really. I know that my parents had Facebook when I was in elementary school, and then I think when I got into middle school, it became really popular for all of like the students in my class to have an Instagram. So it's crazy you mentioned that there's been so many new platforms since your time, and I mean I feel that way too. I TikTok has totally blown up, and that was not a thing when I was in middle school and high school. So it's just crazy how the digital world and social media just is constantly changing, and it's sometimes hard to keep up with.
Yeah. So we've talked about how you kind of became a specialist in social media, which is that kind of combined your skill sets. And like you said, you saw job opportunities in the field because it's just so important. What is your personal social media use like? And how do you feel like working in social media? Because you do other things for ChopLocal. You do email marketing, you do some graphic design, you do blogging and writing for us, but a lot of your day is spent on social media. So how does working on social media most days, almost all day, affect your personal social media usage?
That's a really good question. And I remember thinking this when I was in college, when I was writing like job applications. And that's that if you look on my personal social media, I'm not a very active user. And that may partly be because growing up, social media was such a big thing and it was all about who got the most likes. And I think I kind of had to learn to not put so much value and fulfillment into that. But through my internships, I feel like I view social media completely differently. Like in college, I kind of had that transition because it just feels so different being able to leverage social media as a marketing tool for a specific brand. And so I think that's what I love so much about it. But yeah, if you look at my personal social media, there's not a lot there. But kind of talking about how I got introduced to social media, I remember I was interning at OSU in the marketing office there. And at the time, I was pretty much just writing press releases and then helping with some admin work.
Pretty boring stuff, in my opinion. Or like I've written a lot of press releases in my life, and in my opinion, they tend to be pretty formulaic. They're not super exciting. For me, it's hard to get pretty excited about that stuff. So
I would agree with that. But I think the turning point for me was in that office, they had a little bit of turnover with employees and they had nobody to do their social media. And I had a few ideas that I kind of like brought up in a very shy manner, my shy intern self. And the team that I was working for, they just gave me full reign and they were like, listen, whatever you do is better than what we're going to do, which is not much. And so I just started coming up with ideas and going out and creating content on campus. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence in like learning how to like see what's doing well on social media, coming up with a plan on making that work for your brand, and most importantly, like executing it. And like I said, I think that experience gave me a lot of confidence because they weren't very overcritical, the folks I was working for. They just gave me a lot of creative freedom. And so I think that's I think I have to give that experience a lot of credit for landing me on the path that I am right now.
Do you feel like in general something is better than nothing on social media?
That's a really good question. I hate to like over detail that question, but I'm going to say yes if a couple of stipulations. One, everything on there is factually correct and grammatically correct, and it's specifically like with your audience in mind. It's not something like out of left field. So I think the first one is everything needs to be factually correct. We just need to cover our bases and make sure that it's with someone in mind.
Right. So, for example, maybe don't share something that has statistics that you haven't verified for sure. And if it's something, let's say right now in this world, if it's something political, but you don't normally talk about political things on your page, then let's write that type of thing. But otherwise, generally for these meat businesses, some effort is better than no effort at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest tips I can give a small business about social media is consistency. Just showing up a couple times a week in people's feed will help a lot. And the more consistent you are, the more you figure out what content does well and what content doesn't do as well, which will help you curate higher quality content that will get better engagement.
I know several years ago, and it was probably around the introduction of Instagram, honestly. Facebook used to be a lot more text and text and text, and then Instagram launched, and all of a sudden it became, oh, we need images now, And so now I see very few times where a Facebook page for a business would post anything without an image, and I think that an image makes complete sense. But also video is super important nowadays as well, right? How would you encourage our farmers and butcher shops to include video or prioritize video? Is that something that should be important to what they're putting on social media?
Yeah, I think so. If you think about social media consumers, we're leaning towards that fast paced video content, not word heavy, just visuals that is easy to look at. So I think that's part of the reason why Instagram specifically has pushed Reels so hard. And I absolutely think that that is a very attainable goal to try to incorporate short form vertical video content on social media. And I think with smartphones, it's a lot easier than you may think it is. Just being able to pull out your fairly high quality camera out of your back pocket and hit record, and the sky's the limit on what you can do. And so the fact that social media really, I think, lower quality video seems to do better than higher quality video, which is kind of crazy, but I think that works in small meat businesses' advantage because it makes it easier and you don't have to have as many tools. So I think the trick there is to keep it short form but interesting. But there's so many things that can be interesting. It can be packing a cooler with some trendy audio. It could be a sunset on your farm or ranch. You can get creative with it, but you also don't have to overcomplicate it.
Yeah. Okay, so I have two questions for those of us who aren't as adept as you are. One of them is, you just mentioned trendy audio, or if you come across ideas on social media and you're like, oh, I should do that for ChopLocal, or that's a great idea, I should try to replicate that. How do you collect those ideas? Because I feel like I'll see something that I think, oh, great, I'm going to do this. And then when I have time to actually sit down and do it, I'm like, what was that idea again? So how do you curate that and keep it so that when you have time to do it, you have that idea right there?
Sure. I think I've been doing social media for enough years that anytime that I'm scrolling on social media during my free time, that's kind of always in the back of my head is what am I seeing that's popping up over and over again, whether it's a trend or it's a certain audio or it's a certain phrase that I could maybe use. And so the easiest way is I just click save on that post, which you can do on Facebook and Instagram. And you can even like create folders in your saved content, which I don't do, which probably would be a good idea to do to stay a little bit more organized. But when I'm on social media, I'm scrolling, I'm just hitting save and I'm going to the next thing. Another thing I do that I started doing whenever I started Chop Local, even like before I started, I had a notes section on my phone where when I see something, sometimes I just pop over there really quick and type out quickly like the trend or the idea that I'm seeing. And I have used my notes on my phone quite a bit. So those are the two things I do. I think the only other thing I would do is sometimes if I'm going through my saved post, I'm not seeing anything, then I just start scrolling. I wish there was like an easier way to find stuff, but you kind of just have to be on the app to do that.
Yeah, I use the saved feature too, and I also, this is probably not what we would recommend, but I will also send it to someone. I'll send it to you or Sydney sometimes and be like, we should do this. And actually, now that you're here, it's more like, Sierra should do this. But just having that message back and forth, then I can go back and be like, who did I send that to? And then find it again. So
Now that you say that, I do reference messages a lot too, because like sometimes if I'm on my personal account, I'll send it to ChopLocal or I'll send it to whatever business account I'm creating content for.
yeah, because then you can click on it and save it to that business account saved instead of just your personal saved. But okay, the second question I have for newbies, I would say, or people who aren't as familiar. You already mentioned video should be vertical, so up and down ways, which, like my generation, that is not always the most obvious way to take video for us. The other piece of that is I've heard this term B-roll quite a bit, and I've used it actually when I worked doing press releases. A lot of times we would send B-roll. But can you explain what B-roll means and especially in the context of social media, how can B-roll help people get things out faster?
So, B-roll is a videographer's term. And so, whenever you see a video and you're hearing the audio, but you're not seeing the person talk, you're seeing maybe like a picture or not a picture, a video of a feedlot or of whatever the subject matter is, that's B-roll. It's video footage of not necessarily not the person that's speaking, but it's some type of active thing that's happening. It's kind of like showcasing what the person is talking about.
Yeah, I don't know if it actually stands for background, but that's what I think of it is like background video. I think the first time I used it for work was in 2015. I was working part-time for the Iowa Turkey Federation, and that's when avian influenza first came in the Midwest. It was 10 years ago, which is nuts. But we saw news stations constantly using video of brown wild turkeys, and this was affecting more white commercial turkeys. And so we provided them with B-roll footage of what these turkeys actually looked like, right? And so you can imagine in the news story, like they're talking about avian influenza outbreak, and then you just see the video of the turkeys. That's the B-roll or the background video there.
That's a great way to explain it. And it very well may be, B-roll may stand for background video, but that's a really easy way to think about it. But a lot of times when you're creating reels, you may see an audio or a trend that you can use, and if you have B-roll on your phone already, then it's a lot easier to create. You don't necessarily have to go get the footage. You have the audio saved. You just insert the video footage you have. And so for a meat business, B-roll can be footage of your livestock. It could be footage of you packing a cooler. It could be footage of you at a farmer's market, either setting up your booth or talking to customers. It could be lots of things. It could be like feeding livestock. I think there's a lot of opportunities for a meat business to just, have it in the back of your head. What am I doing today that I can get footage of that may help me down the road? And I think that will help you be more consistent with social media by having kind of that library of footage to work off of and not having to go create new footage every time you have an idea for a video.
Yeah, I know. And even with photos, you could have a boring announcement, or maybe it's not boring, but just a basic announcement, and adding a photo to the post will make it be seen by so many more people. I love to have a collection of nice photos of the farm too, that you don't have to create a graphic every time you say we're going to be at the farmers market on Saturday. You could just pull out a pretty picture of your chickens and post that or something too. So
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, we've been talking about videos and reels a lot. I definitely think that your social media feed shouldn't all be reels. There should be a healthy mix. And maybe static posts, you have like 2 static posts every reel. But I think what you said about having an announcement post, like it can just be a pretty picture and you can keep the information in the caption, because this may be a hot take, but I feel like social graphics, meaning a photo that has any type of text on it, it just doesn't do as well on social media. I think for whatever reason, just a clean visual, whether it's a picture or video, it does better than a social graphic. And so when I do create social graphics, I try to keep it clean and minimalistic. But I think your idea is great of just using, sometimes it's great just to use a good photo. That's all you need.
yeah, I think so. This will be historical reference for you, Sierra. So back in the day, Facebook was only your friends and family, right? And so when you posted a photo, it never had text on it. It was only your friends and family. Then Facebook started allowing advertising, and for many, many years, if your graphic or photo that you uploaded had more than 20% text, like more than 20% of it was covered in text, they would not allow it because they still wanted Facebook to look natural. It was still your friends and family, and here's an ad, but it's still like something that you can trust. They didn't want it to look like a billboard. And I think that that's what you're kind of saying too, is that when you make a lot of social graphics that are very advertising looking, then people know right away. Either I don't know if the algorithm favors photos or graphics that don't have a lot of text, but it wouldn't surprise me based on the history. But then the other thing would be just we subconsciously look at it and we know that's an ad versus this might be somebody that I know and I trust that's just posting a photo, right?
That's a good point. I didn't know that.
Well, I know it's because it was back when you were in middle school. No, I'm teasing. I love to point out the age difference here. I'm sorry.
But that just adds to all of the wisdom that you have, Katie, and you're educating me today.
Right. Right. No, but there's a little bit of historical reference there, but I think that you're right. It doesn't have to be a fancy graphic, just a photo. And the other thing that I see people do that doesn't seem to hurt them at all is they will post the same photo over and over again. I mean, not every other day, but if you have a good photo that you've taken, you can post it every couple months and you're probably going to get different people to see it and they're going to like it. And I would say the same with B-roll, with footage of your farm. Okay, so this is one of my pet peeves about photos and videos of the farm, though, is that we really want to make them pretty, right? And that's a very subjective word. What does a pretty photo look like from a farm? And you and I, as being a little bit more creative, artsy people, you with your photographer's eye, I feel like we're a little bit better at identifying that. So do you have any tips off the top of your head for pretty photos of, especially I would say, of your farm animals or in the butcher shop, things that you want to look for or avoid when posting a photo?
Yeah, and honestly, if it wasn't for like my marketing and communications like background, I probably wouldn't have a great filter in my mind either. But I remember when I worked for the Angus Association, they really drilled this into me. Like we were very particular about like what photos we used and posted. And I remember like I took a picture of some cattle in a pasture and there was like quite a bit of flies, and besides that it was fine, but they saw the flies and that was a no at the Angus Association. Like there's a lot of flies in the picture, we do not use it. And so I think really you just have to think about what is your consumer gonna think about that. Like think of the worst case scenario. And so I think good rule of thumb is like try to only use pictures of your livestock on like green grass, definitely not mud.
Yeah, don't let them look crowded. And we know that like livestock can have a huge pen and they'll still all come crowd together around the feed pan or whatever. But the other thing that I remember when I first started working in agriculture was seeing cattle whose hind ends were dirty, we'll say, you know. I remember one cow calf producer telling me they've got high quality forage. That's what that is. And I'm like, that could be, but to me that doesn't know, I'm like, is it sick? Is that normal? You know, we don't know those types of things if we didn't grow up on a farm and around these animals all the time. The other thing, speaking of hind ends, is I do feel like I run across a lot of photos of hogs that are all crowded around a feed pan or around a bunk, and it is a photo of all of their rears lined up, and that's not not my favorite social media photo I've seen. So,
Yeah, I would agree. Another one I see is a picture of a wet calf, so like a calf that was just born. And like I understand like the excitement around that and like, oh, this would be cool for social media. Unfortunately, it's not. Like just wait till the next day when the calf is dried and milking on its mama.
yeah, a little bit cuter then. Hogs are hard. I think pigs are hard because they're not usually on green grass, right? But I we have seen them on fresh bedding. If they are in a bedded barn, that looks nicer. Although those photos can be very just brown, I would say. You know, there's not a lot of contrast. It can be kind of dark. With pigs, I love it when people get down like to their level and take a photo. Because a lot of times with pigs, especially, like you're up above them and you're taking a photo and you're getting a lot of dirt, right? Or a lot of ground. But if you get down to their level and take pictures, that can be so cool. Same with cattle, same with calves. If you get the phone or in their face. I guess I should turn it this way, right? We talked about, for those of you listening, I'm making hand motions again. So, but you know, turn it vertically and get in their face and you can get a good photo that way.
Yeah, for sure. And like whenever you're taking photos, it's also a good trick to like remember get close-up photos, but also get like backup a ways and get more of a picture with more background in it because that gives you more variety.
If you wanted a close-up photo, do you zoom in on your camera, on your phone, or do you take the photo and then zoom in when you're editing?
If I can, I just use my feet as zoom and I get closer to the subject. I think with phones, like it's a really powerful camera in your smartphones. However, I feel like it's not as high quality when you zoom in, which is why I would say if you can get closer to your subject, that would be better. But if you can't do that, I would probably zoom in on the camera rather than doing it after the fact, because then that camera can try to at least focus in on that subject and that you won't be able to do in post.
Yeah, some other things, like you said, we love the green grass, blue sky. Even if you don't think that you're going to use those photos right then, if you have one of those perfect days, take the photos because you can always use them later on. I also love seasonal photos when we've got like beautiful foliage in the fall or really pretty white snow, you know, a fresh snow before it's been all trampled and yucky and that type of thing can be really pretty. And then of course like the tall grass in the summer and yeah. So
It's just a good rule of thumb to, kind of like wait a second before you take a picture and just think about like, how do I want this to look?
yeah. And I always think, I'll be honest, our farm is not all angles of the farm are pretty. You know, we have a scrap heap that needs to go to the scrap yard that is some old appliances and lawn chairs, you know. And then we've got a manure pile where we are sort of composting the manure. And that's the other thing is I try to look like I may have the cutest picture of a calf that's close up to me, but then in the background, if there's junk, you got to watch for that type of thing too.
Yeah, and like I think we all have junk piles, and so it's crazy. Like even as a photographer, there are times I look at a photo and I'm like, man, if I would have just taken a step to the left, if I just would have taken a second to look at this and be like, it would be just a little better if I got a little further low.
Yeah. Always a learning experience, huh? Even when you're doing it more professionally, right? So, we did a social media webinar a few weeks ago, and we are going to publish that audio. It's available on our YouTube channel, Sierra Led It. You can watch that webinar, and she has a lot of tips for social media. But I also want to talk about, and we're also going to publish the audio in this next episode. But what are some of the trends that you're seeing or things that you've seen that have worked really well on ChopLocal's social media since you started about 3 months ago?
Sure. I think a lot of the food content does well, specifically whenever we do a cooking video that's, sped up. We don't use every single or include every single step of the process. We just kind of like get a highlight reel and include the recipe in the caption. I think those have done really well. And then whenever we just capitalize on what's like being relevant in the world, I think in general that does well on social media. And kind of what I think about Chop Local is I remember I did 2 reels kind of about the Super Bowl, but I try to tie that into Chop Local and our message and what we do. And I think because like it was so relevant at the time, that did really well. And so I think like meat businesses, they're like holidays, other events, food is revolved around all of those things. And so it's easy to just kind of like take a different angle at it to include like something that's relevant and still push and sell your meat on social.
Even in our staff meeting this morning, you were saying that you'd done food videos, but then last week you did a food just photos, and that went over well too. And so having that mix of videos and photos works well too. Are there any tools, like I'm thinking about, I've got this little ring light thing. Look, this is a good look. I've got this ring light and you can clip your phone into it and it's got a little tripod. Are there any tools like that that you use or that you think for farmers and butcher shops would just make creating, like getting these videos so much easier for them?
Yeah, I think, ring lights, that's always an option too, especially if you're creating content like maybe in your butcher shop or inside. That can give you a bit more of an advantage. One thing that I use quite a bit is I got these mics off of Amazon where I can literally plug them into my iPhone, and then I have these little mini mics. And so whenever you're creating like video content and you're kind of speaking about maybe what's going on the farm that day or that season, that'll kind of elevate your audio. And also, I think it's kind of like trendy on social media to like hold a mini mic. And so you can have a lot of fun with that. And I got it off of Amazon for a pretty good deal, and the audio quality is pretty good.
I think that's so funny that they hold those mics like that because sometimes, I mean, you could just use your earbuds. If you have an iPhone, you have AirPods. Is that what I don't have an iPhone, obviously, but I have earbuds too. I can just talk into my earbuds and that will pick it up just like a microphone most of the time. But sometimes, do they hold a mini mic or are they even holding an AirPod sometimes?
I haven't seen people like hold an AirPod, but I definitely see like the mini mics a lot of times. So that could be fun. I see people like using the mini mics, like asking people questions out on the street or something. And so like if you have like employees or like just your family, I think it'd be fun to like go up to them with a mini mic and I don't know, ask them a question, something that's either relevant or funny. I would say those, if you're gonna like buy some technology to help you with content creation, I think those mics I like a lot. You can also get a gimbal for your iPhone that you like attach it to, and so it'll help you get smoother video.
So a gimbal is, okay, hold on. I'm digging in my drawer of accessories here. Tell us what a gimbal is exactly.
So a gimbal, so you can think of it kind of like a tripod, except you don't like set it up, you hold it in your hand, and the gimbal essentially like creates, or it will hold your iPhone, and so it keeps it like more smooth whenever you're moving around.
So is this like a selfie stick except fancier?
Not really.
Okay, we're gonna have to Google what a gimbal is for some of us are gonna have to look this up.
But that's kind of high tech. You don't have to worry about getting a gimbal. If you have budget to get some social media accessories, that can be something fun, and you're doing a lot of video content, that'll help your video just be a little bit smoother.
I was gonna ask what you use. Like you filmed a few things where it is like in selfie mode, it's you talking to the camera. And so is that what you use as a gimbal?
When I'm in selfie mode, I can't really use a gimbal, so I'm just carrying it. So a gimbal is like whenever you're like taking, say, like a video of your cows and you want to kind of do a walk around. I think, sometimes we see video that's very like harsh and it kind of like isn't smooth. And so that gimbal just kind of helps it be a little bit smoother.
Okay. But you can't use it in selfie mode. I mean, honestly, like a selfie stick, if you were going to do videos like that, or do you normally just hold it out in front of you and talk?
I usually just hold it out in front of me and talk. I think you could use a selfie stick if you wanted it to be a little bit more stable and it's like kind of awkward for you to hold the phone in front of you. But I also think like that selfie mode and holding it in front of you and like that distance by holding it with your hand, I think that is a lot more natural to look at on social media. But all of this to say, you don't really need a lot of fancy accessories if you just have your smartphone and you get creative. You can really, the sky is the limit.
Yeah. See, I have trouble like getting the right angle and holding my phone steady in selfie mode. That's why I was asking so much about that. But I also have this little guy that's like a little tripod that will hold my phone, and the legs will wrap around something almost. So like you could attach it to like a fence gate, and then stand there and talk to it or something. And I use this sometimes. And then I have a tripod with a ring light on it that like this little guy I will use in my kitchen sometimes. I don't cook very often for videos usually because my kitchen is messy in the background. I'm trying to avoid showing that off. But I will use my tripod or that mini tripod for cooking videos sometimes just so that I can put my phone there and I don't have to worry about picking it up and taking shots. It can just record everything for me.
Yeah. And if you're creating a lot of content by yourself, I think the tripod would actually be a really great tool to have.
Yeah. And you can get those pretty cheap on Amazon too. That doesn't have to be super expensive. That is one thing I'll point out too, talking about backgrounds. I mean, it's okay if your kitchen is not pristine, but if you are selling meat and you're showing off like cooking in your own home, I've seen some really like kitchens where the counter really needs to be washed off and it becomes like almost a concern where I'm like, if this is how they take care of their kitchen counter, are they taking care of my meat the way that I want them to? So think about that. That's actually something that I talked with another professional about who, not a marketing professional, more of a small business professional. And he didn't really understand why the aesthetics of someone's farm shop, like they had an on-farm stand that did have, the parking lot was full of weeds, there were piles of junk, or there was a pile of garbage that needed to be burned or whatever, and he didn't understand why that might hurt their business. And I tried to explain that, like, that's the whole idea, is that when we see things that look clean and neat and tidy and aesthetic, it gives us something aspirational, but it also makes us think, like, if that's how they're taking care of X, Y, or Z, then that's probably how they're going to take care of their meat and take care of me as a customer and take care of their livestock, right? And those are important to show off on social media too, I think.
There's definitely this idea of aesthetic content, which is exactly what you just described: clean, simple, and that's important on social media. And when people are scrolling, they're taking a glance at your posts and immediately making a judgment, whether that's, oh, that looks a little messy, or if they're like, I don't know if I can trust them because of whatever might be in the background. And so yeah, it's just definitely things to think about.
Yeah. So without giving away too much from the webinar that we did, because we will publish that next week, the audio, or like I said, it's on YouTube right now. What are some of those tips that you have for everybody in this small meat business world for social media? We've covered a lot of different things already, I feel like, but if there are big things that we missed, what are they?
I think the biggest thing was just coming up with a plan on how you're going to tackle your social media. And so on that webinar, I provided a simple, easy to follow plan from idea generation all the way to like scheduling posts and finalizing posts and being able to plan and create content for a full month and have it scheduled 2 weeks in advance. And so on the webinar, I kind of broke that down into different simplified steps to make it easier for someone that owns a meat business and has so many other things going on. And they're not like a social media specialist like me that does this full time. Really, in all reality, social media can only take up a few hours of their week. And so when you watch that, you can kind of see how I break down creating social media and getting yourself a plan so you can be consistent and follow through. And so I think that was like the main takeaway of the webinar.
Yeah, and I think that our viewers loved it. They got so much good information out of there. One thing we haven't really talked about is stories. So on Facebook and Instagram, and I don't know, maybe TikTok, you can post stories. So can you explain what a story is and how it's different from a regular post and maybe what business goals it can help you reach, I guess?
I just remember growing up, my first experience with stories was in Snapchat. And, we don't really use Snapchat with marketing, but I don't know, it was quite a few years ago, Instagram and Facebook started incorporating stories as a different form of content. And at the time, I thought it was silly because I was like, this is just a Snapchat thing. But it actually can be really effective and help you get more eyes on your content. An Instagram or a Facebook story isn't a static post, it is something that lives on your feed for only 24 hours. And so when you're on Facebook and Instagram and you're scrolling through social media, at the top of your screen, there are stories that you can click through. So it just gives you a different way to look at content. And so, like I said, those Instagram stories only last 24 hours. And so that type of content doesn't have to be as clean and as polished. A lot of times it's a great way to post anything newsworthy, like a countdown of maybe when you're going to a farmer's market or something coming up like that. And a cool part of Instagram stories is there are lots of different features. You can add like polls or a question or links and just give your audience ways to like fully interact with your content, which is really fun. One of the really effective ways that you can use stories is you can take a post and you can share it to your story, which makes it easy to create an Instagram story. And then you can go into the features and add a link, which is a game changer for Instagram because for whatever reason, when you add a link in an Instagram caption, it's not clickable, which makes it hard to get social media audience to your website and to become a customer. And so I think for that reason, Instagram stories are definitely something that you should be posting on regularly. And it's easy, like you can create your own Instagram story by like a photo or a graphic, or you can share an existing post to your story and add features like I talked about a link or a poll or a question, or even you can add GIFs if you want to get fun with it. But definitely an important form of content to not forget about.
Yeah, I feel like stories are a lot more behind the scenes, a lot more selfie videos. Just they really seem like they can help you build trust really, really well. And maybe even get those are your more engaged users are the ones that are going to click through your stories and things like that. I'm still old fashioned though. I still scroll the Instagram feed. I don't click on stories very often, but I know that I'm in the minority. I know that a lot of people are looking at stories all the time.
Yeah, I feel like for me it's about half and half, but I think a lot of people just scroll through stories for whatever reason. And so a lot of times you can get more reach through your Instagram stories and maybe even a regular post. And I think like you totally hit the nail on the head when you said that a lot of people use Instagram stories for like behind the scenes stuff like that, or them talking in selfie mode type of video, because like I said, it doesn't have to be as polished. It's maybe like more casual type of content because it only lives there for 24 hours and then it's deleted.
Yeah, for sure. Stories don't get shown to anyone that doesn't follow you, though, do they? Is that right? It'll only be shown to your followers.
I think so, except sometimes whenever you, another feature of an Instagram story is you can include a location, so you can tag whatever city you're in, and then when I do that, I see non-followers from that area view your story. So
Interesting. So, especially for our local shops or farmers selling locally, tag a location in your story because, and we say that anyway, tag the location in your post because it can help people in that area see you there. I didn't know that.
that's something I learned when I started working for ChopLocal, was I was tagging locations, and then I would look at who viewed our post, and we picked up a few viewers from that area that I tagged. So
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we do like to tag the location in our posts. And I feel like when we do a post on Instagram or Facebook, it'll get seen by some of our followers, and same for Reels. Gets seen by some of our followers, might get seen by people who don't follow us, and so we're hopefully encouraging them to follow us based on that. But when we post to stories, it's mostly almost always going to people who've already followed us. And so they're a little bit of a warmer audience. They've already said, like, hey, I'm interested in the ChopLocal for whatever reason. And so here's more information. And that's why I feel like sometimes those can be received really well because it's people who have basically opted in to see our social media already.
yeah, and they want your content. They want to see what you're doing. So yeah, don't be shy with posting Instagram stories.
Cool. Well, this has been super interesting, Sierra. I feel like there's things, our listeners or our followers, I'm sure, run the gamut from being super not confident with social media all the way to looking for more advanced techniques, which that is definitely something that you can help with too. But it's been really fun to have you added to our team because you have such a fresh perspective on all of this. And if you guys have listened to this podcast before, Sydney and I complain about social media. And so now we have Sierra to help us out. And Sierra's helping me with some ChopLocal University content so that I can keep up on that and keep in touch with all of you. And it's been a great addition to our team. So,
well, I've really enjoyed working with ChopLocal. Like I said in the beginning, I think it just kind of takes me back to my roots, where I came from. And I really enjoy being able to use something I'm passionate about to help support small meat businesses and farmers and ranchers.
yeah. And it's been so fun. We've done a few little collaborations with our ChopLocal vendors to make some fun videos that have gone over well. We have a couple more planned that I know we're excited about. And I know that's been something that we've talked about before, is probably one of our favorite things about ChopLocal is getting to know all the farms and butcher shops. So without giving away too many spoilers, we have a farmer who's, we'll say, a generation ahead of me that's going to do a really funny reel for us coming up, and we're excited. So we just love that type of collaboration too.
Yeah, so definitely everyone listening to this needs to follow us on ChopLocal so they can go check out that really exciting reel that's coming up.
Yes, get some inspiration, and then of course follow us on ChopLocal University, because we actually have had Sierra do some little videos with some marketing tips and tricks and ideas for the next month, and I think that's something that we'll probably expand over the next few months. So
Thanks so much for tuning in to Meat Success. We hope this episode gave you fresh insights and inspiration to beef up your meat marketing. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, follow us on social, and share with your fellow farmers and butchers. Have questions or ideas for future podcasts? Reach out to ChopLocalUniversity.com. Until next time, remember, there's more than one recipe for meat success.